Morning, kids! This week we're talking about kettles and Brexit. And no, I don't mean Boris Johnson's warning in 2016 that the EU is going to ban our kettles. I want to talk about what it means to no longer have Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister. And with the National Rejoin March this coming Saturday, we should probably talk about what that means for Brexit as well. This week is about our return to common sense. And again, no, I don't mean that having Liz Truss as our Prime Minister is a return to common sense. In fact, having our third unelected Prime Minister in 6 years after a referendum that was supposedly about us rejecting unelected politicians is about as far from common sense as you can possibly get. But this week, Boris Johnson gave his last speech and it was just classic Johnson, and it showed us exactly what we're leaving behind. He rambled on using his usual artistic language, and then he threw in one line that got everybody talking so that nobody focused on the worst thing that he said, which is a strategy he's admitted to in the past. And this week, the media focused on his comments about kettles.
If you have an old kettle that takes ages to boil, it may cost you £20 to replace it. But if you get a new one, you'll save £10 a year on your electricity bill.
Which sounds bad, right? Millions of people suffering the worst poverty crisis since the 50s with energy bills in the thousands, and here's the Prime Minister talking about saving a tenner? But that clip was taken out of context. He only said that as an example of spending little money now to save more money later, as an analogy for investing in nuclear power. But he knew that he'd be taken out of context. He knew that it would spark an argument between the people defending him and those who are outraged that those words could even leave his lips during a financial crisis, and that's why there were almost no headlines about this line.
Families up and down this country are going to face a very tough winter, and we just have to accept that.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Now sure, after saying that she's against giving people handouts during this crisis, Liz Truss is now saying that she'll do something to help people, although she's refusing to say what that something is. But even today, when it was pointed out to her that her tax cutting plans would give more money to rich people than the people who desperately need help right now, she says,
to look at everything through the lens of redistribution, I believe is wrong. Because what I'm about is about growing the economy. And growing the economy benefits everybody.
Which is classic trickle-down economics, the Tory fantasy whereby if you give more money to rich people and big corporations, the money will eventually trickle down to the poorest in society. Even though big corporations are making record profits, while 1 in 4 adults are skipping meals to survive. Alternatively, you could give people that money directly so that our country's consumers can actually afford to spend money consuming, which will revitalize the economy. Oh, and it also has the added advantage that fewer people will die from the cold this winter. But Boris Johnson says,
we just have to accept that.
But he could get away with that because he embodied the right-wing populist ideology that Tories have been looking for. And he was protected by Brexit. Liz Truss isn't. Because despite the fact that before 2016, Boris Johnson had also repeatedly said that Brexit would make people poorer, he's still the face of Brexit to millions of Brexiteers across the UK. The one person they trusted to deliver a proper Brexit, even though his Brexit deal, which they supported at the last election, was only 5% different to the deal that Theresa May negotiated, which they all called a betrayal. But his had a Johnson attached to it. But there's no Johnson now, and once again the Tories find themselves up shit creek, and again they've handed the paddle to a Remain campaigning woman who the public barely knows anything about to somehow steer Brexit Britain. And even as we sit here, with the Truss family no doubt currently picking out their new wallpaper for number 10 Downing Street, we've already got Tory MPs plotting to get rid of her and replace her with a big strongman again. But here's the upside. As we talked about before, Liz Truss doesn't stand for anything, and that's been clear to the public for months. It's been brutally highlighted that she campaigned for Remain in 2016, she U-turned spectacularly on her plan to cut the pay of civil servants outside of London. Kay Burley even asked her on national TV,
will the real Liz Truss please stand up?
But that's an opportunity, because people on the right of UK politics no longer have an ideological leader that they feel they want to unite behind. And while in fairness, Labour has been loud and clear on its plans for an energy price cap and a windfall tax, we haven't heard much from them in terms of their values or their vision for the UK. So our country has a serious lack of genuine leadership, which is an opportunity for we, the progressive majority, to say what we actually stand for. Because while Boris Johnson could rely on his manufactured image as a true believer in Brexit, Liz Truss can't. Boris Johnson could stand in Parliament and accuse Keir Starmer of being a Remoaner because they stood on opposite sides in 2016. Liz Truss, not so much. Liz Truss can't rely on being a true believer in Brexit. All she can do is either point to the referendum result or try and argue that it's good for the country. As for the referendum result and the will of the people argument, that referendum was 6 years ago. It was in the 2010s. Can we please wake up to the fact that we're now in the 2020s? Since that referendum, we've had 2 general elections and 4 prime ministers, and in the last election, the majority voted for parties that were offering us a chance to vote to stay in the EU and avoid Brexit altogether, and all the polling says that we now want to rejoin. Not to mention the relationship that we now have with the EU, which has replaced our membership, and in international terms, that is Brexit, has been formally rejected by all 3 parties representing the winning side in that referendum. So the mandate of the 2016 referendum has thoroughly and, well, medically expired. The people don't want it, the leaders of Brexit have disowned it, so the religion of Brexit as some democratic will of the people is dead. So if we're ever going to be a society of common sense, we have to be able to judge Brexit exclusively on whether it is making things better or worse, especially given that things are so hard right now. Now, I could go on about the thousands of pigs that we've had to burn due to a lack of EU butchers, or the half of UK exporters who've had to stop trading with the EU due to the red tape, or the fact that Boris Johnson said that Brexit was leading to an exodus of Jewish people from Northern Ireland due to the trade barriers causing a block on kosher meats. But if you're here watching this, you've probably heard me say all that before, so let's keep it fresh. Let's check on the latest with Brexit. Okay, and I'm using Google Incognito, just to be fair. So, let's go to news. A Kent brewery that was originally hailed as a Brexit export champion has 1 customer left. Cool. EU and the UK could have another go at Brexit talks. More negotiations. Good. Channel sewage spills may breach Brexit deal, says EU. Whew. Britain's uncontrolled sewage dumps may breach Brexit. Oh, God. Okay, so this is going really well. Sterling suffered its worst month since Brexit. Analysts expect it to plummet to new depths. No, of course, Boris didn't get Brexit done. Immigrants simply can't win in Brexit Britain. Festival of Brexit is a £120 million flop. It would have been better for everyone if the Brexit festival had stayed in its box. What have we got? How Brexit is impacting small wine businesses. Ballooning costs and paperwork nightmare are hitting local merchants where it hurts. That's in the Telegraph, so Brexit bugle. Living in the EU... here's how Brexit could affect your bank account. Most people living in mainland Europe must sever ties with British banking. It's time we all accepted that Brexit is only ever going to make things worse for the people of the UK. And so at some point, based on nothing more than simple common sense, it has to be reversed. Because yeah, sure, the National Rejoin March this Saturday is going to have a lot of people with EU flags who are there because they believe in the EU project from an ideological standpoint, but that's not why I'll be speaking on stage there. I'll be there simply because Brexit is making life harder for people and we really can't afford it. So the sooner politicians realize that it's cutting us, the sooner we can stop the bleeding. So if you feel the same, join me here at 12 midday on Saturday the 10th of September at the Marble Arches opposite Hyde Park. That's this Saturday. And we're going to be walking from here all the way to here. Of course, everybody knows that we're not rejoining the EU under this government or the next government. We already had a 3-year debate over whether there should be a second referendum, giving us the chance to stay in the EU. And the majority voted for parties committed to a second referendum. But under this voting system, it meant nothing. Because as long as the Tories are able to get a majority of the control in that parliament, despite only getting a minority of the vote, we will not get progressive policies in this country. And that goes for every policy issue. A couple of months ago, Dominic Raab was in that building refusing to enshrine the right to an abortion in his new Bill of Rights. And it just so happens that as I'm filming this, there's a pro-choice rally happening right in front of me. But Raab doesn't give a shit. He's from a constituency where Labour and the Lib Dems, 2 parties that are more left-wing than he is, got more votes than he did, and yet he's still able to inflict right-wing policies on the whole country. That's why I'll be here on stage on Saturday giving a speech about how all progressive movements need to join together because the path to all of our goals is the same. If Labour commits to giving us a fair voting system where all votes count equally, then all the parties to the left of the Conservatives can work together at the next election on that basis. And because progressive parties always get a majority of the vote, we will win, the Tories will fucking leave, and we can actually give the next generation the country they deserve. And the next day, on Sunday, I'll also be speaking at an Extinction Rebellion protest in Hyde Park, making the same damn point about climate change, because we're all fighting the same fight. But Brexit is the political linchpin, because we're currently living under a government whose manifesto is literally called Get Brexit Done, and it's the tool that they use to do whatever they like and call it the will of the people. Want to send desperate refugees to Rwanda? Just say that people voted to control our borders. Want to restrict free speech in universities? Just point to the fact that Brexiteers are feeling embarrassed about the damage they've done. Want to downgrade our human rights protections? Just say we voted to control our laws. As I said, nobody is pretending that Brexit's going to be reversed tomorrow, but we need to inject some common sense into our politics. And common sense says that Brexit is harming the country, people don't want it, and it has to be reversed at some point in the future. So if you're angry about the state of the UK, you want to take a stand against the government and join up with other progressive movements, and you happen to be able to get to London on Saturday, be here. Because people across this country are really suffering, especially this winter, and all the evidence shows that Brexit is making it even worse. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, arch-Brexiteer, says that at the end of next year, it's going to get worse still, with a 70% increase in the cost of food. Doing that to the families who managed to survive this winter recession is not common sense. Because we have a Prime Minister in number 10 Downing Street down there, who actually campaigned for Remain because she knew that Brexit would hurt the country. We have a leader of the opposition in there who campaigned for Remain because he knew that Brexit would hurt the country. We have a civil service, so the government's economic brain, that is telling people that Brexit is hurting the country. And yet, despite the worst poverty crisis in a lifetime, neither the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition has the guts to say that Brexit is bad. So I guess we'll have to. And they'll tell you,
We just have to accept that.
on Saturday, I'll be telling them that we absolutely do not. Fancy it?